Welcome to 5 Points of Articulation, where I review action figures and then articulate 5 points to help you decide if you want to add that figure to your collection. The 5 points I discuss are packaging, presentation, posability, playability, and price. I'm Jason, and if you enjoy my content, please like, share, subscribe, do all the YouTube rigmarole. Today, we're taking a look at the new McFarlane Toys DC Direct 7-inch page puncher Superman. Starting off with the packaging, it's similar to DC Multiverse. The page punchers come in a big wide window box. Despite not being DC Multiverse, we have very DC Multiverse-like names and logos on the side, UPC for those who want it, and on the back we can see the figure, the comic it comes with, and the page puncher's logo. Between the two-tone, mostly white box, giant DC logo in one corner, DC Direct logo in the other, window on the side, and figures dwelling in a white void on the back, it really does feel like a pretty natural continuation of DC Direct. For packaging, I'm giving Page Puncher Superman 1 whole point. Moving on to presentation, and this Superman stands at just 7 inches. First things first, and you'll notice that this Superman looks a little bit different from most that you've seen. That's because this one's based on the style of artist Lee Bermejo. As you can see, his work is darker, more hyper-realistic paintings, and that definitely comes through here. From the top, and we see a lot more line work than we're used to from Superman. Definitely a hardness to his features. Leastways, I'll be honest, I don't really look at this face and see Superman. That said, all the details have been painted well. Moving on down, and there's a bit of a flourish to the S. In general, this is a much slighter Superman than we're used to. The hands, however, are way too big. One thing I don't particularly love is this version of the belt, and in general, the colors are muted and darker. Traveling down the leg, and the boot's mostly like Superman. The only real difference is he has an extra one of these, and also some officially branded Superman treads. Flipping him around, and his cape is all wahoozy. Sadly, mine is just kind of floating instead of connecting to the suit, but overall, this look is growing on me. In this instance, I'm not grading it based on my personal preference, but how well it captures the artwork. And while the hands are too big, the rest of the proportions are okay, especially as compared to Black Adam. For presentation, I'm giving this Superman 1 whole point. Moving on to posability, and the articulation is pretty solid. As usual, Superman's head's in a dumbbell joint. This one has a bit more forward impact than usual. As such, you can really position the head looking up, and also really good looking down. Great amount of tilt, and all the way around. Moving on down, and Superman has swivel hinge shoulders that raise up over 90 degrees, forward and back with a rotator cuff, bicep swivel, double jointed elbows, and again the older style McFarlane wrist balls that swivel and hinge. Shifting to the torso, and Superman has a diaphragm joint and a dumbbell waist. He can arch back this far, which for a flying character is everything you want to see. Using his head and torso, and here's the flying pose you can get him in. I will say he does hunch over a bit more than usual. I'll also say, dang, this guy needs a sandwich. The tilt on this figure is really good, and of course he can twist. Below the waist, and Superman has the typical McFarlane hips. They can kick forward 90 degrees and do a perfect split. And then traveling down the leg, he can twist at the hip, has double jointed knees, toe articulation, and the new and improved ankle balls that can swivel, hinge, and pivot. Even by McFarlane Toys standards, this might be the best articulated Superman figure they have ever made. Not only are all the joints there that you want to see, but they also have a fantastic range. Articulation worthy of the word super. For posability, I'm giving this Superman 1 whole point. Moving on to playability, and I'm going to do things a little bit out of order. First things first, and Superman comes with these alternate flying hands, and dear lord are they huge. Seriously, look at just how comically gigantic these are. In my Ravager Thor video, I joked that if you gave him Hercules fists, they'd look like boxing gloves. Technically, I was quoting that 70s show, but compared to that, these are more like Mickey Mouse gloves. What's crazy is if they used the Action Comics 1000 hands, they would have fit perfectly, but the pegs are simply too small and they won't click in. Even so, what I'm really excited to talk about is the trading card and figure stand. As you can see, they come in a baggie instead of being glued into the box, meaning you can reuse the package without destroying it. I know I said it in my last video, but this is something I really want to see happen in DC Multiverse. And if you want to read that card, pause here. While I do like that we have a new trading card collection, I do have one big problem with this, and it's actually my biggest problem with this series. The comic book. Not that the figure comes with a comic book, I love that. My problem is that all 4 figures have the exact same comic book. And now I see they're also going to have 4 of the same trading card. If you like to keep your trading cards in a binder like I do you want to just see 4 of the same over and over and over again? I know I don't. I might not like the 3-inch scale, but what I do like about these page punchers is that each one comes with a comic book specific to the version of the character that you're getting. And don't get me wrong, it's a nice looking comic and I do look forward to reading it, but what incentive do I have have to complete the set. What I'd love to see is either different comics for different characters, or spread out 4 parts of a series. That way I have to buy all 4 figures. So in review, plastic bag yes, making all the cards the same, no. And if you saw my Black Adam Versus and thought it was jarring how I just reused that part of the video instead of giving you something new, that's pretty much the point. But playability is more than just accessories and object lessons, it's also about how well your figure plays with others. For just some of the Superman figures that brought us here, and here we have Superpowers by Kenner, the John Byrne Superman from the DC Direct Through the Years box set, DC Universe Classics by Mattel, New 52 from DC Collectibles, DC Icons from DC Collectibles, the DC Designer Series Libre Mayhew version. This, of course, is the design that the new figure is based on. The all-new Superpowers by McFarlane. It includes a hole in the cape, and the 3-inch page punchers. For some Superman villains, and here we have Lex Luthor. He's definitely a bit on the tall side. Then again, he is in a suit of armor, so maybe you could justify it. That said, here he is with Super Luthor by Mattel. This almost works better. On that subject, here's Bizarro by Mattel, and the McFarlane Bizarro. Pretty sure they have the same fists. Here we have General Zod, Mr. Mxyzptlk by Mattel, Darkseid, and the Warhammer Necron Warrior, which I use for a Metallo. For a couple of Superman allies, and here we have the DC Essentials Supergirl, and the Mattel Superboy. For some other Justice League members, and here we have the New 52 Wonder Woman, DC Essentials Wonder Woman, and Gold Label Wonder Woman. Here we have the Flash from DC Essentials, and DC Multiverse. Here we have the DC Multiverse Endless Winter Aquaman, DC Essentials Hal Jordan, DC Multiverse Jon Stewart, and DC Direct Brightest Day Martian Manhunter. Finally, for the darker half of the world's finest, here we have the DC Essentials Batman, Detective Comics 1000, Battinson, Batfleck, 3 Jokers, Rebirth, honestly these two go together perfectly, and my own custom Hush. For my only other 7-inch page puncher so far, here we have Black Adam. For some 7-inch scale Marvel Select comparisons, and here we have Captain America, Thor, and the Incredible Hulk. For a relative scale comparison, here he is with Pizza Spidey and the Spectacular Spider-Man, and as always, here he is with Stealth Iron Man. Of course, you don't need supervision to see that I saved all the head swappable Supermen. Here we have DC Essentials. The Bermejo head and the Essentials body sits a bit too low, and the pegs don't match, so it's really loose. That said, it scales surprisingly well. The other way around, and the Essentials head sits a bit high. Again, it does scale pretty well. And then moving over to McFarlane, and here we have Action Comics 1000. While I'm perfectly happy with the Action Comics 1000 head, this does look pretty good, and the colors are similar enough that you don't have to paint it. The other way around, and the pegs don't match, so you would have to get creative. That said, there is one other swap with this figure I'm kind of curious about: the shorts. For any customizers out there hoping to turn this into a regular Superman, this one's for you. While you can do it, just be warned that this is really big on him. Here we have Henry Cavill. Not surprisingly, this head's a bit small, but I think it could work. Obviously, you need to repaint it, but luckily the Libre Mayhew aesthetic is pretty realistic. Not surprisingly, this head's a bit big for the body. Still seeing Cavill in a more traditional Superman costume is pretty cool, and it does give me an idea. There's no texture, and you'd have to paint the belt, but the reds match. I'm not entirely sure this is the right head for it, but we'll come back to it. But of course, if you're curious what Cavill himself would look like, here you go. Here we have Rebirth. Just like Action Comics 1000, it sits a bit too low and is also a bit too big. If you're dead set on it, you've got to find a way to raise that neck. As for the other way around, no. Just no. He looks like a hamster that stuffed his cheeks. And here we have the solar suit. Thanks to the beard, this one doesn't look as bad. The skin tones are close, and if you wanted to, you could get away with it. The flip side doesn't stretch his cheeks out like Rebirth did, but again, the proportions simply do not work. Lastly, here he is with Superboy Prime. To be honest, I much prefer this to the head that came with it. Like all of them, you'd need to do a repaint, but I think this one might be worth it. I also kinda like this head for Superboy Prime. For one thing, it looks a bit more sinister than your usual Superman, and going back to that hypothetical repaint with the shorts, this might make for a pretty cool classic Superboy. Also, this head on the Cavill Kit Bash is pretty cool too. Considering that it's technically a DC Direct branded figure, I do think it's interesting that this Superman scales better with my DC Direct collection, and while a flight stand and alternate hands are pretty typical for a McFarlane Superman, these hands are laughably inappropriate for this figure, and a $5 comic that you can get with 3 other figures simply is not a good enough bonus. For playability, I'm giving this Superman half a point. This leaves us with nothing left to discuss but the price. I pre-ordered Page Puncher Superman on Amazon for $24.99. The only thing bumping this up from $20 to $25 is the comic book, and when you're getting that comic with 3 other figures, it really doesn't seem worth it. For price, I'm giving Page Puncher Superman half a point for a grand total of 4 out of 5. For more Page Punchers, check out my Black Adam verses, or my Superman verses between the 3-inch Page Punchers and the new McFarlane Superpowers. Thank you so much for watching. I'll be back again real soon, but until then, play nice and have fun.